To another episode of the practical SQL Server. I'm careful because I'm sitting on my bar stool and I don't want to like flip over and then just fall off and then I disappear from the camera. Anyway, welcome to today's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show, where I share my own personal experiences as well as my customers' experiences on how you can implement. And there's a little bit of a delay. I am Let me see where that is coming from. Oh, it is coming from, okay, good to know. Because I started hearing like audio or something. Anyway, welcome to today's episode where I share my own personal experiences working with SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery, as well as my customers' experiences working with me, working with their own implementation of high availability and disaster recovery. But instead of just focusing on the technical aspect, I want this to be as practical as I can be, meaning you can take action on it, because at the end of the day, what good is information if you're not going to take action on it, right? And I bring in some of my own insights, some of the things that I've not just learned, but also observed in the field. And this topic, I'm going to put in the banner right there real quick. All right. The topic of today's episode is why a technical answer is never the right response to a technical question. And I know saying never is something that I never see how what I did there. Saying never is something that I try and avoid doing, mainly because, for one, there will always be, and even always, there are different cases. Every environment is different, every situation is different, and it is our responsibility as technical professionals to evaluate what the situation is, what the different cases are, in order to provide the right solution for them. And this is not just in response to a technical solution that they need. For instance, somebody might ask you to do something. Somebody opened up a ticket, they requested for you to do something. Let's say, hey, I want you to take a backup of this database and restore it on, let's say, the development environment, right? Our typical response to a technical answer or even a technical request is to do exactly that, to provide them with a technical answer if we're being asked a technical question, or if it's something like a ticket, it's something that like a project, we go ahead and just do exactly what we were told or what the ticket request is all about. And I saw this, and I still see this happen in news groups, forums, uh, public platforms like Stack Exchange or Reddit or the Microsoft Answers platforms, where people would ask questions, specific technical questions, and that's the very reason why they're there in the first place, right? DBA, that's stackexchange.com. You want to ask questions about anything DBA related, whether it's SQL Server, Oracle, or any type of relational database. And then somebody would post a question, and somebody would then answer based on the technical question that they had. I was reading a post the other day about a disappearing tempdb, right? Somebody created a extra tempdb data file, restarted the server, and then disappeared. I also saw somebody asking questions about how do we configure, excuse me, how do we configure um, uh, a network name for an availability group that's not a that's only read scale availability group, meaning there's no failover cluster. And the questions that they ask are responded to by people who have really good intentions, that want to answer those technical questions with technical answers. And we have been trained in this way even before you got into tech. As a sysadmin, as a DBA taking care of databases, you are at that level where, sure, you're there to provide technical answers to technical questions, right? When you're starting out, yeah, it's tempting to do that because you want to prove that you know exactly what you're doing. In fact, even in interview questions, when you're applying for a job, they would ask you dozens of technical questions, and you're there sitting, I wish I can answer this question. It's all about the technical question and responding to them in a, with a technical answer. And the reason why I emphasize this a lot is because I have seen so many cases where when somebody would ask a technical question, we immediately respond to them with a technical answer. In fact, this was brought about by a conversation I had with one of the members of the Power BI product team a couple of years ago. And he's been working at Microsoft for more than 10 years now. And so he goes back to those earlier days when there was no such thing as Power BI. It was the evolution of different products. And he was working on the Excel product team with the engineers and the developers that wrote Microsoft Excel. And it's interesting because in those days, one of the reasons, and he was telling a story about why Excel is what it is right now, there was a certain case more than 10 years ago when somebody from the Microsoft finance team walked up to the Microsoft Excel team and asked them, hey, we are trying to put data into the spreadsheet and we are limited by the number of columns that we had. So back then, I can't remember what year it was. There was a maximum, the maximum number of columns in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet was 256. And so people at the from the Microsoft finance team walked up to the developers of writing code for Microsoft Excel and told them, look, we need more than 256 columns for this report. Can you do that? And of course, a typical response, any developer, any technical professional, DBA, sysadmin, you name it, is sure, we'll go ahead. Probably back then, they didn't have a process where they would open a ticket and the developer would start, or a feature request, submit a form, the developer would then immediately do it. But that's what they did. They added more columns to a point where now I think it's more than 65,000 plus columns that you can support. And as this guy was telling me this story, he understood that there could have been a better way to address it right there and right there and then. Although on the flip side, of course, without that request, we would not have Microsoft Excel as it is today. But the idea behind that is we have this tendency as technical professionals to respond to how we have been conditioned, and that's how we have been taught from the time that you were in school to the time that you're now working, even in a job interview, where if somebody asks you a technical question, you'll respond with a technical answer. However, from my experience, this does not actually solve the problem. In fact, it what's the word I'm looking for? It creates even more complexity to the problem, because what we're trying to do is trying to answer questions that they thought they needed an answer to, right? And that's why I want to share with you 3 strategies that I use to respond to a technical question that would eventually lead to solving the real problem and not just what they thought was the question was. Because here's the thing, when somebody asks a question, either they're trying to solve a problem or they're just curious. I mean, just look at your own behavior when you're looking for something, looking up on your favorite search engine, whether it's Google, Bing, Yahoo, whatever search engine you're using. When you type a keyword or a phrase, you're either just curious, yeah, you want to know something, or 2, you are trying to solve a problem. Those are the 2 main reasons why you want answers to your questions. I'm just curious, or I'm trying to solve a problem, right? In most cases, when you're getting a ticket or a change request or a feature request or anything for that matter, somebody is trying to solve a problem. In a business setting, people are not just curious. That's why they're asking questions. They could figure that out on their own with their favorite search engine. They're trying to solve a problem when they're asking a question. And because of our background, our nature as technical professionals, our default response is to answer their question with a technical answer, right? Again, how many replicas do I need for an availability group? Or can I add? This is a typical one. You have a change request come in. Somebody said, or a project manager said, please add an extra replica to our availability group. That might mean that that replica is in the same data center or in a different data center. That's an example of a change request. Or please restore, take a backup from production and restore it in the development environment. That's another request that somebody like a project manager or a team lead might request, submit a ticket, and then you go ahead and respond to it, right? But by doing so, by simply responding to a technical request or technical question with a technical answer, we're unknowingly contributing to a much deeper problem, because they might be trying to solve a problem, but we're trying to solve a problem that they thought they have, or they're communicating that they have, but we don't have an understanding of, right? This, I want to share with you three things. Again, make sure that you have your pen and paper ready to start taking notes. The first one is when you get a technical question or a request for something, to do something, whether it's to take a backup from production to DR or a development environment, is to start with asking a question. I know it's counterintuitive, because our default response is, when you get a question, is to answer back, not a question, right? Here's the thing. This is our default response when we were kids. When somebody asks a question to us, we are curious, just curious, right? You ask one question, or somebody asks, or let me rephrase that. Somebody introduces you something when you're a kid, and you ask a dozen of other questions, a series of questions, because you're really that curious as a kid. Too bad, or unfortunately, somebody, maybe your parents, your siblings, would say, shut up, keep quiet, stop being so nosy. And so you've trained yourself, you've conditioned yourself to no longer ask questions. And that's why it sounds silly to ask a question when somebody asks you a question, right? It sounds silly because we have been conditioned for so long to just answer a question, right? However, like I said, if you're not asking questions, you're probably just trying to solve a superficial problem. I'll give you a very simple example here. Let's say you went to a doctor and you're feeling, in my case, because I broke my right leg a couple of years ago, let's say you are feeling a little bit of pain on, you know, on your knee area. You go to the doctor and say, hey, I'm here. I want to go for a quick checkup, but I'm feeling a bit pain on my upper knee, or the section above my upper knee. If your doctor suddenly responds by saying, oh, no big deal, here's some painkiller, you're good, what would your response be? How would you react to that? Some people would say, well, wait a second, doc, are you not going to ask me to do something? Are you not going to do some tests? If the doctor does that, then he's performing malpractice, because he needs to perform additional tests, ask a series of questions. In fact, when you go to a doctor's office, he would ask you, hey, fill up the form, right? Your age, your weight, uh, anything that he can use to further analyze what is actually going on. Family history, medical history, what did you eat? What did you do? What activities were you into? And this is part of, quote unquote, asking questions. He just framed it in such a way, hey, I'm not going to ask you questions, just fill up the form, right? Instead of him asking you all those individual questions, you're filling up the form, right? Instead of responding to a technical question with a technical answer, or instead of just responding to a request for change or a request for implementation or anything, is to ask questions why they want to do it in the first place. Because they may think, or the person who's requesting for that change may think, that this is the thing that they want that actually solves the problem, when in fact it could be beyond that. Going back to that story that I heard about the people from Microsoft Finance Department asking the Microsoft Excel team to add more columns. Sure, the developers were able to add more columns to Excel, to now it's grown to about 65 something thousand columns on one Excel's worksheet. But the thing is, the developers did not ask if the Microsoft Finance team, or what the Microsoft Finance team actually wants to happen. They just added another column on the spreadsheet, or more columns than you can ever thought possible, right? Because again, as technical professionals, our immediate response is to answer a question, whether it's technical or not, with a technical response. But what we're doing is simply providing an answer to the question that the person asking thinks is what they need. This is, again, a very common thing. If the Microsoft Excel team simply asked more questions, the Microsoft Finance team would have had better ways, maybe improving processes, on how to present data without adding more columns. And again, like I said, you could think of that as a feature request, to a point where now you can have like thousands and thousands of columns. Well, probably the question that I need to ask is, if that was a database table, how would you respond to that when you are getting asked for 65,000 columns in a table? Even though SQL Server supports it, why do you need it, right? And that's the thing. You're trying to know more about the request, what is driving the request, understanding what the request really is, in order to provide the right response. And this is uncommon because, again, we're trained to respond by, okay, you want this, I'll give it to you, right? This, interestingly, when it showed up a couple of years ago, when I was working with a client, they got introduced to SQL Server 2017, and by now you're probably aware that SQL Server 2017 runs on Linux. So they came up to me and asked for a request. We want to implement always-on availability groups on top of Linux. And just like any technical professional, I kind of like, sure, I can do that for you. That's a good project. That's a multi-week project. I'm all in. But I took a step back and started asking questions. I asked them, so why? And I kind of used the 5 why frameworks. The thing that annoyed people when I was a kid, I started asking like the why questions. Why do you want your always on available groups on top of Linux? Well, the client said, well, for one, our entire team, we all use Linux. The only reason why we're using Microsoft Windows is for Active Directory and SQL Server. Okay, good enough reason, but why? Well, we want to standardize our implementation. Like, our developers use Linux, our sysadmins use Linux, we all use Linux. Okay, fair enough. But for standardization purposes, you want your always on available groups to run on Linux. You want it standardized. But why do you want it standardized? Oh, because we want to streamline our processes and make life easy. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. So I asked, how many people on your team know always on availability groups? There was just 2 of them. And they're in the process of evaluating always on availability groups. They've not worked with always on available groups yet at that point, but they're looking at exploring it. Okay, so that at least we know something. They want to run it on Linux because they want to standardize their processes and streamline everything to make life easy, which then led me to the question, okay, so it's only you and the other DBA knows a little bit about always on availability groups. How many people on your team knows Linux Pacemaker, the underlying high availability solution for Linux, like the back of their hands? Yeah, crickets. Nobody. So you're telling me that it's only you and another DBA who's possibly aware of how always on availability groups work, and you want to run this on top of Linux Pacemaker that nobody knows about? So you're telling me you want to do all of this because you want a high availability solution that can help you streamline and standardize your process to make your life easy? And that's what we really got into, the reason why. They need a high availability solution, sure, but they also need something that can make their lives easy. They only have like 2 DBAs. They're managing hundreds of database servers, but you're adding more workload that would mean you got to be 24/7 available as part of the support of this highly critical and mission critical application. Not to mention, by the way, you're going to go on vacation, you're going to go on weekends and holidays, and there's only the two of you, and you still haven't figured out what always on, and you still don't know Linux Pacemaker. And that's the thought process that I guided them into. And they started thinking about, okay, so maybe running always on available groups on Linux is not such a great idea. Well, I had them make that decision. I just guided them through the process. Like I said, by asking questions, we get to the bottom of what people really need. Sure, they want always on available groups on Linux, on multiple replicas, but what for? Right? And so the first thing that you need to do is start asking questions. When you get a technical question or you get a question or a request, ask questions. Further, dig deeper, right? Like that doctor, he would ask you, oh, does it hurt on the right side of the knee? Does it hurt on the left side of the knee? Let's go do some tests, do some x-rays. Maybe we'll find some. And he would not recommend something unless he's 100% sure that it is exactly what you need. But because if he just say, grab some painkillers, pop in some pills, that's medical malpractice, right? So that's the first thing. Ask questions, and I'm spending a lot of time on this because this is very important. We are not conditioned to ask a series of questions. Sometimes we stop at the first question. Okay, why do you want this? Oh, yeah, we need this. Okay, we'll do it. Right? We don't dig deeper, and asking questions allows you to dig deeper into what the real problem is. Because sometimes you might just be solving a superficial problem or a symptom. But as a technical professional, your responsibility is to solve the deeper problems, the root cause of the problem. Right? Somebody asks, hey, can we change our witness to file share witness from node majority? You go ahead and do it, but not ask, so why are we doing this in the first place? Right? They give you a response, and sometimes you're more than happy to have, okay, I'll do it for you. Just submit a change request ticket, right? Ask questions, and then this leads me to my second strategy. Ask questions that would get them to, number two, clarity of what the real problem is. My responsibility, your responsibility, is more than just providing technical solutions or technical answers to questions. It is to guide them to clarity, to get them really clear about what it is that they really want. Just like what I did with my client a couple of years ago, is to guide them through a series of questions on what it is that they really need. What problem are they really trying to solve? Are they trying to solve implementation of an always on available groups on Linux, or providing a high availability solution while streamlining their process, making their lives easy? Because again, how would your life be easy if you're the only person trying to manage something that's supposed to be up 24/7, right? So the second strategy is to guide people, whoever's asking the question, to guide people to the clarity of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. That in itself is huge, right? Because again, some people would just come to you with questions or with a request because they have a limited understanding of what they want. I'll give you one example from a case that I recently worked on. They want their architecture reevaluated because they want their architecture reevaluated, or we ended up reevaluating their architecture, but their initial goal was, we want to prevent outages. We want to prevent outages. And so I'm curious though, why do you want to prevent an outage? Well, for one, we are a finance company and we're serving clients and we have to be available 24/7. So the first question I asked was, what is your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective? Yeah. Crickets. Just like everybody who wants a high availability solution, just like anybody who needs something like an always on availability groups or a failover clustered instance, when you ask them the question, so what is your recovery point and your recovery time objective? I wish I have this crickets sound effect that I can play every time I ask that question. But the reality is they're trying to do something without really understanding what the goal is. That is more important because you don't want to be implementing a high availability solution. You don't want to be implementing a 4-node Windows Server Failover Cluster with 4 replica availability groups that stretches across 2 different data centers without really understanding what the real goal is. So in addition to the first strategy, which is asking a series of questions, the second strategy is to get them to clarity of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. What is the real goal here? What is the problem that we are trying to solve? Because if we are not clear on that, then what you do today might be completely useless 5-6 months down the road because the real problem has not been dealt with. This reminded me of another client that I worked with. Man, I just get, it just keeps coming back. All of these projects that I've worked with in the past, they wanted to do a lift and shift, right? They wanted to take their, at that point, it was a 3-node Windows Server Failover Cluster with a 3 replica AG. It's running on Cisco UCS on premises, and they want to move it to the cloud. Yeah, those expensive Cisco UCS machines. They wanted to move everything from on premises to the cloud. So I asked them, and I could do that, right? I can do that. But the first question that I asked, again, going back to the first strategies to ask questions, so why do you want to move your on-premises infrastructure to the cloud? Well, we want to save on cost. We want to save on licenses because, well, they're just going to do a BYOL. They're going to bring their own licenses to the cloud. So that's going to cut some costs. Well, because everybody talks about the cloud and it's cheap. Okay, let's reevaluate that. We did the math. Turns out that they are going to spend 3 to 4 times what they invested on premises when they move to the cloud. Talk about cost savings. So we did the math, didn't pan out. So I went back to my first strategy, which is asking more questions. So why do you have an available group in the first place? Yeah, I did not freeze. That's exactly the response. Crickets. And at one point, the lead engineer told me, okay, so when we were designing this about 4 years ago, this is what we were trying to accomplish. Back then, we needed always on availability groups because we want to be highly available during the time that we are making or implementing changes. What kind of changes? Well, database code updates, installing service packs, cumulative updates, making changes to the operating system. And I asked, well, how long does your maintenance window usually last? 4 hours. Wait, you're telling me for an entire month you want a highly available system for things that you only have to deal with 4 hours within a month? Like, yeah. That was the real goal. The real goal was never really all about implementing always on availability groups. The real goal was to make sure that they are highly available during that 4-hour maintenance window that they have every single month. They would push their code changes during that time. They would do anything that they have to do, like, again, making changes to the operating system, installing service packs, cumulative updates, security patches. And if it didn't happen during that window, they have to push it for the next month. So they only need that complex architecture for 4 hours. That got me thinking that they don't have to do a lift and shift. They could simply build a standalone SQL Server instance and will architect a solution that would automate something that would get them to their goal. That was getting them to clarity. They were so clear that their ultimate goal was not to build an always on available groups on the cloud. Their ultimate goal, and that's one of the reasons why I keep asking questions like, what's your recovery point and what's your recovery time objective? Because by getting clear, being clear on what those two goals are, whether it's for HA or DR, is going to get you to the solution that you really need. Not because somebody said, oh, go and do always on availability groups or failover clustered instances. In fact, we ended up not doing either a failover clustered instance or an available groups on the cloud. It's just standalone instance. We just architected it in a way where when they have to do maintenance, they're highly available. only during that time, right? And so that's the first strategy, is you gotta ask questions, not question, but a series of questions that would then get them to number two, get them to the clarity of what problem they're really trying to solve, what goal that they're really trying to achieve, right? And number three, this is the most important one. Number three is that you gotta be their trusted advisor. You gotta be their trusted advisor, meaning if they have a problem or if the end user has a request, you have to look at it at a much bigger point of view, from a much higher point of view. Are they just looking at providing a highly high availability solution? What are they trying to accomplish here? What are they trying to achieve? What's the ultimate goal? You go back to number one, ask more questions, get more clarity. And number three, becoming a trusted advisor, meaning you only make recommendations that would be good and that would be for the best of either the person asking or the entire team or the business as a whole. Because that would separate you. That would set you apart from your peers or from your colleagues whose only goal is to provide technical answers, to provide technical solutions to answers. Because sometimes an improvement can happen without even providing a technical answer. Maybe it's a process improvement that we need to do. And why a process improvement? Well, the process would stay. There's no version modification. The process would stay. New people come in and out of the company, new versions of SQL Server, but the process stays. Maybe sometime you need to improve the process. In fact, this is one thing that I've learned working as a data center engineer like a decade and a half ago. We did not focus on the tech. We focused more on the process. We spent a lot of time on whiteboards. We spent a lot of time pen and paper, diagramming and improving the process because our belief was we can replace this with a totally different tech. Sure, we can throw away SQL Server, move to the cloud, and the process still works. Unlike when you have to deal with a technology platform, for instance, like you're so fixated on just doing everything always on availability groups that you no longer see the possibility of other solutions outside of SQL Server, right? It's just like whenever I see people ask questions about T-SQL, how do you write this in T-SQL? And then when you start asking questions like, what are you trying to accomplish? Oh, we want to use T-SQL to do some work on the operating system. That's why we need to enable uh, XP shell. I'm like, okay, first and foremost, that's a security risk. And second of all, T-SQL is not the only tool that you can use to accomplish this task. There's other tools out there. But again, as a trusted advisor, you have to start looking at even if it's just a simple problem, with a much bigger perspective. Look at it from a higher point of view so you can see, is this a people problem? Is it a technology problem? Or is it a process problem? In fact, I use a framework, the PPT manifesto. I'm going to look at all three, and I would use technology as the last piece that I'm going to look at, because maybe it's a people problem. The way they respond to incidents, for instance, there's no proper escalation procedure, right? Oh, we had an outage, took 4 hours. Okay, let's first review your infrastructure. Maybe there really is something wrong with your infrastructure, but also maybe you need to improve your escalation process so that your outages don't, last for 4 hours or 4 days. That's why you got to be the trusted advisor. And you have to start looking at solutions outside of your technical area of expertise. Okay, possibly it's not necessarily a SQL Server problem. It might not be a Windows problem. It could be a process problem or a people problem, right? We had an outage. Somebody deleted the cluster name object in Active Directory, and now we can't fit. Oh, okay. Wait a second. That's not a technical problem. That's a people problem because you gave them permission to do that. Even though it's accidental, they still had the permissions to delete cluster name objects in Active Directory. And that's why you gotta start acting and thinking like a trusted advisor. It would set you apart. It would let you rise beyond what is expected of you, right? It sets you apart from your colleagues, from your peers, whose only goal is to answer technical questions with technical answers and technical solutions. All right. Those are the three things that I wanted to share with you about why a technical answer is never, okay, I'll retract that, is almost always never the right response to a technical question. You need to understand what is really going on. You need to have a bigger picture of what the real problem is. And the person asking for your help, the person asking for that question, they need to have real clarity of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And number three, becoming the trusted advisor that would give them the right solution, the best solution. Of course, there's really no such thing as the best solution, because you can only give what you have within the limits of the resources that's available, right? But you give them the best that you can at that time when they need answers from the questions they are asking, right? Tune in again next week for another episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show, where I share all of these um, nuggets of insights from my. Sometimes I'm thankful for all of these things that uh, questions that customers bring in, clients bring in, because they give me the opportunity to share them with you. And if you need any help on anything SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery, maybe you're in the stage where you are evaluating a solution, or you are thinking of implementing something like an always on availability groups, but your team's not ready, or this was dumped over to you by a managed services provider, they left with no documentation, and now you have to take care of it. Reach out, use that link on the screen. That link would get you to my calendar page, where you would schedule a time, a time where you can pick and choose the time that works for you. We'll get on a call. I'll do the exact same thing that I just shared with you. Ask you questions, get you clear, and then become the trusted advisor to get you to achieve your goal, the goals that you want, right? To solve the problems, the real problems that you need. See, I'm using the same framework in these strategy calls. Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Let us have that conversation. All right. Tune in again next week for another Practical SQL Server HADR show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and enjoy your weekend. Goodbye.